The value of the attack response header is an arbitrary value generated by the server. There are no restrictions on how the server must regenerate the value, so servers are free to set the value based on whatever means they choose, such as a hash of the body contents or a version number. As an example, if a hash value is used for the attack header and the hash value of the index.html resource is 33A64DF5, the response will be as follows. If that response is stale, the client takes the value of the attack response header for the cached response and puts it into the if non-match request header to ask the server if the resource has been modified. The server will return 304 not modified if the value of the attack header is determined for the requested resource is the same as the if non-match value in the request. But if the server determines the requested resource should now have a different attack value, the server will instead response with the 200 OK and the latest version of the response of the resource. RFC 9110 prefers that servers send both attack and last modified for 200 response if possible. During cache revalidation, you both if modified things and if non-match are present. Then, if non-match takes precedence for the validator. If you are only considering caching, you may think that last modified is unnecessary. However, last modified is not just useful for caching. It is a standard HTTP header that is also used by content management systems to display the last modified time, by crawlers to adjust crawl frequency, and for other various purposes. So, considering the overall HTTP ecosystem, it is better to provide both attack and last modified. Forcing validation. If you do not want a response to be reused, but instead want to always fetch the latest content from the server, you can use the no cache derivative to force validation. By adding cache control no cache to the response along with last modified and attack, as shown below, the client will receive a 200 OK response if the requested resource has been updated, or will otherwise receive a 304 not modified response if the requested resource has not been updated. It is often stated that the combination of max age equals 0 and must revalidate has the same meaning as no cache. Max age equals 0 means that the response is immediately stale, and must revalidate means that it must not be reused without revalidation once it is stale. So, in combination, the semantics seem to be the same as no cache. However, the usages of max age equals 0 is a remnant of the fact that many implementations prior to HTTP 1.1 were unable to handle the no cache derivative, and so to deal with that limitation, max age equals 0 was used as a workaround. But now that HTTP 1.1 conformant servers are widely deployed, there is no reason to ever use that max age equals 0 and must revalidate combination. You should instead just use no cache. Don't cache. The no cache directive does not prevent the storing of responses, but instead prevents the reuse of responses without revalidation. If you don't want a response stored in any cache, use no store. However, in general, a do not cache requirement in practice amounts to the following set of circumstances. Don't want the response stored by anyone other than the specific client for privacy reasons. Want to provide up-to-date information always. Don't know what could happen in outdated implementations. Under that set of circumstances, no store is not always the most appropriate directive. The following sections look at the circumstances in more detail. Do not share with others. It will be problematic if a response with personalized content is unexpectedly visible to other users of a cache. In such a case, using a private directive will cause the personalized response to only be stored with the specific client and not be leaked to any other user of the cache. In such a case, even if no store is given, private must also be given. Provide up-to-date content every time. The no store directive prevents a response from being stored, but does not delete any already stored response for the same URL. In other words, if there is an old response already stored for a particular URL, returning no store will not prevent the old response from being reused. However, a no cache directive will force the client to send a validation request before reusing any stored response. If the server does not support conditional requests, you can force the client to access the server every time and always get the latest response with 200 OK. Dealing with outdated implementations. As a workaround for outdated implementations that ignore no store, you may see kitchen sink headers such as the following being used. It is recommended to use no cache as an alternative for dealing with such outdated implementations, and it is not a problem if no cache is given from the beginning, since the server will always receive the request. If it is a shared cache that you are concerned about, you can make sure to prevent unintended caching by also adding private. Was lost by no store. You may think adding no store would be the right way to opt out of caching. However, it is not recommended to grant no store liberally, because you lose many advantages that HTTP and browsers have, including the browser's back and forward cache. Therefore, to get the advantages of the full feature set of the web platform, prefer the use of no cache in combination with private.